welcome to the virtual Sunday service for the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Lake Norman. Our fellowship members follow different paths to find purpose and meaning, but we are united by our belief in the inherent worth and dignity of all beings. We are a liberal and open faith community, and everyone is welcome regardless of race, sexual orientation, gender, economic status, or ability. We are united by our obligation to express our faith through acts of justice and compassion. My name is Jim Price, and I've been an active member of this congregation since 2019, and I've been a Unitarian since 2012. Our opening verse today comes from Deborah Burrell and is titled, "A Flame to Light Our Path." Fire consumes and casts a bright light. May our chalice flame consume our regrets for the past, our fears for the future, and our worries about today. May it light for us a path of joy and peace. And now I will light our chalice. And say our chalice lighting words. We light our chalice to illuminate the world we seek. In our search for truth, may we be just. In our search for justice, may we be loving. And in loving, may we find peace. Our speaker today is the Reverend Scott Neely. He has spoken with us a couple of times, and he is very entertaining and instructive. I'm looking very much forward to hearing what he has to say today. The title and his description are very interesting. First, a little bit about the Reverend Scott Neely. He has served as minister of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spartanburg, South Carolina, since 2017. He is a founding board member and strategist for Speaking Down Barriers, an organization that uses facilitated dialogue to build our life together across the differences that divide us. He is a graduate of Wofford College and Harvard Divinity School. In April 2015, he presented a TED Talk on race and racism entitled, "What Will I Teach My Son?" What will I teach my son? The title of his presentation today is share, the word share. And he describes it thusly. In a world driven by greed, share. We welcome the Reverend Scott Neely to join us today.
Our opening reading comes from the Gray hymnal in the UU tradition, Singing the Living Tradition. It's number 584, a well-known and beloved passage from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a network of mutuality. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that. We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds which precipitate and perpetuate war. One day we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. We shall hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. Hello, my name is Scott Neely. I serve as minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spartanburg in South Carolina. It's a great honor to me to be invited to be with you again this week. I enjoyed the opportunity to participate in virtual worship with you about a year ago, and I'm grateful for the invitation to join you again. Your congregation has been important in the work of this congregation in a number of ways, some demonstrative and some more subtle. But there are many connections, pastoral connections and congregational connections. And I just want to begin today by expressing gratitude that you gather, and that you gather with purpose, and that you share what you have, all of your resources, all of the ways in which you show up in the world, that you share those sources of energy with others of us to make this world more livable for everyone. Thank you very much. Join me for a moment in silence. Share. I had the most remarkable experience. I meet with a group every week, every Wednesday at 4:30. A group of individuals from across the state of South Carolina. 6 of us in all gather to collaborate. And our work is to meet as a coalition from many different agencies, many different groups that are advocates for immigrants, and particularly for Latinx or Hispanic immigrants in South Carolina. For more than a year and a half, we've gathered every single week, every Wednesday, to manage the distribution of funds that have been donated, that have been offered through grants, received through grants, to provide direct financial assistance to Latinx, Hispanic immigrants across the state of South Carolina. And so, because we gather every week, we learn something about each other. We hear one another's stories, and we work to support families and individuals over the course of many weeks sometimes. In this instance, one of our colleagues on this weekly Zoom meeting, this weekly call, a man named Agner Munoz, who works for an outstanding organization called PASOS. It just means steps in Spanish. A community health program that has branches all over the state of South Carolina and works to advocate for and support Hispanic families throughout the state. Agner was updating us on the situation of a family that we've been monitoring for almost 2 months. And he shared that at long last, funds from a state agency had been leveraged and had come through to help this family. And when he shared this news, a cry of jubilation went up on our team across our Zoom room. And some of us, the more foolhardy of us, stood up to give him a standing ovation in that virtual space that we gather in every week. And the reason is that Agner has been working with this family week in and week out for 2 months, every week. And he has repeatedly filled out forms, submitted data, completed applications, the same application over and over and over again, simply to try to help this family secure basic financial resources to remain stable and to provide for their well-being so that they can be a part of our work in the world. They can contribute to the world in a way that's vital for all of us. Every week, Agner would meet with the family, talk with the family, and try to access funding that has been provided through allocations in the millions of dollars from the federal and state level, even down to the county level. Funding that is meant to be there for people to help them during the pandemic, during COVID. But every time he would try to apply, he would be met with a different person on the phone who would ask for a repeat of the same documentation, the same applications over and over again. One thing might be just off in the way the application was done, a name written incorrectly, or something just slightly askew, and the whole thing would have to be done over again. And then a period of waiting to find out whether funds had been secured or not. You can imagine what it's like to have bills due every month and to enter into a process that is meant to provide support, to sustain us, to help us with our bills that are due, and to watch week after week as that's not coming through, as new applications have to be done, to be caught in a bureaucratic eddy, a kind of whirlpool that you're stuck in and can't get out of. What it would be like to see bills come due and to worry about whether they're going to get paid. And if they don't, what are going to be the repercussions? Week after week after week. And you can imagine the power of having somebody who's bilingual, somebody who is versed in multicultural work, knows how to navigate these systems, standing with you and showing up with you over and over and over again. So that finally, when the application is accepted and the funds come through and the bills are paid for that bill cycle, just that cycle, the sense of elation and relief that at least that has worked, at least that step has been taken. The gratitude on our team was immense because part of our work is trying to leverage other funds in order to extend the funds that we've secured through donations and grants. It was a powerful example of the sharing of financial resources that our governments, the many levels of our governments, have seen fit to share during this pandemic, during this global health crisis, for the benefit of one another and the good of our economy, so that families are not evicted, so that people are not without power and water, so that people have food, so that our lives and our economy can be sustained for the good of everyone. That's the purpose of those funds. It's a powerful example of seeing that finally materialize after a lot of administrative frustration, a lot, but his persistence paid off, and the funds were shared. And the good that that could do after being stuck for so long, it came true. It came true. The good was realized. And we felt that elation in connection with that family, certainly in connection with our colleague. But even more, it was an example of the sharing of our non-financial resources. The finances were the critical piece, the goal. But the finances would never have come through without the sharing of major non-financial resources, and above all, Agner's dedication and energy, his commitment, his faithfulness to this family, his willingness to show up in solidarity with them week after week after week after week, and the support of his organization, certainly of financial support, investing in his time and in his employment, to encourage him to continue to show up on this family. What must have seemed like futile waste of energy many times. It definitely led to headaches and anxiety. That commitment to give of ourselves for each other, and what that repeated gift of ourselves, that sharing of ourselves can achieve. The boulder that it can push up the mountain and over the mountain, rather than having it roll back to the foot of the mountain. What he achieved this week, finally helping the family secure what they needed, was an enormous witness to the power that we can generate when we share. When we share, certainly financially, but much more than that as well. We cheered for Agner in the meeting. We celebrated in that moment what he had done and what it would mean for the other resources that we manage, that family could be cared for through that set of resources, and therefore these resources could be used to support other folks who didn't qualify for that kind of assistance. We celebrated that whole sense of interconnectedness and mutuality, which Dr. King has already spoken to us in this service. And after our cheers, after our standing ovation, after all of our foolishness and headiness and joy, Agner smiled, a sincere smile, un hombre sincero. He smiled, genuine joy. And in that joy, he said, I'm so happy. And there are 4 more families that I've got to keep working with in the same way. Can you imagine? You probably can. To experience one victory and to immediately reroute that energy, to dedicate it to support 4 more families. What a gift. What power of human adaptability and persistence to make a world that is livable for us all. And why do we have to do this? Why does it take this much effort in the world for us to help each other and care for each other, especially in a global pandemic, in a global health crisis, perhaps the largest natural disaster that any of us have experienced, largest scale, I would be almost certain to say. Why does it require this much effort to help each other? And I think the simple answer is, we live in a society that from its foundations has been built on greed, on scarcity and greed. From the very beginning of our cultural evolution on this continent, North America, beginning 500 years ago with the encounter of European conquistadors and colonists and settlers with indigenous peoples of North and South America. That very moment was informed by greed. And the actions taken in that encounter by European conquerors was informed by greed. Seizing land by outright violence and by the violence of disease, genocide by pandemic, as diseases from Europe swept through the Americas and decimated the indigenous population. And as the path of conquest was executed decade after decade to take more and more land for European powers and for European settlement and colonization, and as people's lives, first indigenous lives, and then when indigenous people began to die, African lives were seized and exploited for the sake of labor, to cultivate that land, to mine it of its resources, for the sake of greed, to build the wealth of nations. The history of North and South America and of the United States is built on the seizure of land and the exploitation of labor for the sake of wealth, power for the sake of greed. These roots are so deep, the violence is so vast and devastating, that we who are the beneficiaries of that wealth and of all that it has brought, no matter our class status, no matter our personal finances, just to live in this country and experience its grandeur and its wealth, its prestige in the world, its global power, all that comes with the technological and medical and educational resources that have accumulated here, the infrastructure that we've built. For we to be people who live on this land and enjoy these resources is for us to benefit from that greed, whether we know it or not, and to participate in a culture that has built itself from seizing resources from others in order for us to enjoy that benefit. It is a profound and difficult legacy, history, for us to reckon with, one of deep, deep violence and oppression. And we are its inheritors. We didn't do this. We didn't start this. It's not initially our fault, but we are certainly born into its patterns. And we can see those patterns replicate through time when we come to consciousness and realize that something is wrong, that something needs to be changed, and we enact laws and shift our culture to make those changes. Nonetheless, we can see how deep these patterns of greed and exploitation are and how they persist. Just one example. When we realized that enslavement was wrong, and we fought tooth and nail with ourselves, fought a bloody civil war, the only war whose casualties rival those that we've experienced in this pandemic and the loss of U.S. American lives. We've far surpassed all of our other wars. When we finally realized that enslavement was wrong, we passed the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery. But when we did so, we encoded in the 13th Amendment an exception clause that still allows for enslavement in the case of being found guilty of a crime. People who are convicted of crimes can still work as slaves in our carceral system. If you don't believe me, and it's fine not to believe me, just read the 13th Amendment. You can stop this video and look it up and read its language. It contains an exception clause that provides for ongoing enslavement of incarcerated people. And so when slavery in its official external form was abolished in our country, nonetheless, people became sharecroppers and functioned in a virtual slavery, a slavery beholden to economic systems that kept them bound to the land and in debt to landowners. And when we realized that that was insufficient and tried to move forward with new systems, new ways of governing ourselves, Jim Crow laws were passed. And when we realized that the legacy of segregation and unequal power before the law and unequal opportunity within the law was devastating our country and creating vast inequities, we passed the Civil Rights Movement. But at the very moment that the Civil Rights Movement passed, in the mid-1960s, political campaigns undertook concerted effort to develop what we have come to call the war on crime. And we saw escalate in our country from 1968, the year that Dr. King was assassinated, from 1968 until the present day. A rapid escalation of incarcerated people in our country, so that we have become the single country in the world to incarcerate more people than any other nation in the history of humankind on the face of this earth. We've outdistanced every other civilization and nation in human history by incarcerating our own citizens who work for pennies on the dollar, slave wage for multinational corporations producing products that we all purchase and buy. Greed is a persistent pattern, exploiting land and labor, that it is very hard for us to shake, very hard for us to break. It persists through time, and we are wrapped up in it whether we know it or not. We participate in these systems whether we can see it or not. We are inheritors of a terrible legacy. But if greed goes down to the roots of our society, we always have a choice to transform it. There's always another step that we can take. Because the opposite of greed is to share. And when I speak about sharing, I'm not speaking about a vast political philosophy or economic philosophy. I'm not talking about something systematic and deeply philosophized. Although it is interesting to think about how political and economic systems based on the principle of sharing are demonized in our national rhetoric. It's a very interesting thing to notice, and it tells us something. If we live in a culture that claims to be a culture of freedom and a culture of cooperation, but when we talk about what it would be like to create national systems of sharing, we immediately see that as against our national interest, against our patriotic identities and duties. We should pay attention to why we demonize sharing on that philosophical, economic, and political level. But I'm talking about what each of us can do individually and as groups. We don't have to wait for national movements and political movements. If greed is what our inheritance is, every day we can choose instead to share our resources, to share our time, to share our identities, to share our resources, to share everything that we have for the sake of each other. When we make that choice, however incomplete it is, it transforms those roots of greed that shape all of our lives. It pushes back on the culture of greed and exploitation that we've been born into, whose messages we've imbibed without even realizing it. It shifts just a little bit. And when we choose it again, it shifts it just a little bit more until we build lives that are constantly shifting from greed to sharing. And this is major. This is significant. Think of the stories we ourselves tell ourselves as a people whenever there is some kind of national crisis or national disaster. Think of hurricanes. Think of floods. Think of major winter storms and power outages. Think of tornadoes. The way that neighbors spring forward to help each other in crisis. And we praise that, we honor it. The way that congregations and civic organizations and municipalities spring into action to serve one another in the moment of crisis. And we can think, too, of how hard it is for that to be sustained over time, how much dedication it takes, and of the many stories that crop up of how resources don't reach where they're supposed to, of how these efforts don't last as long as they need to, of how certain people get cut out. Think Hurricane Katrina and the flood of resources and the number of people cut out from those resources because of class, because of race, because of geographic location. We can see how we spring to share in the moment and how hard it is for us to sustain that work. How powerful then when a person shows up in our lives. A person like Agner, who shows us a more excellent way, who pushes forward relentlessly to say we must continue to share, yes, our financial resources, absolutely, because all of this is about the exploitation of people and land for the sake of greed. But not only our finances, ourselves even more, to make those finances shift and come into place, to liberate people, to help people live the fullness of their lives. And think about what that achieves. Think about what it does in the world. It doesn't just help an individual family. It helps us all. This coalition that I'm a part of, the work that our congregation has found itself in partnership doing over these last 18 plus months in the pandemic, it has been absolutely transformative work for us. We have learned about the lives of Latinx immigrants in a way that no news article can possibly teach us. Listening to our partners, listening to the stories of these families, and advocating for them, working to raise funds that will support them. And on one level, this is just charitable work, trying to provide direct assistance for rent and mortgage and utilities and sometimes food to help people just for a month. Just for a month. But when we do this work in partnership, when we listen to each other, and when we do it in a sustained way over time, and when we ourselves are changed by the work, not just giving something that we have, but receiving as well, that mutuality again that Dr. King speaks about, that partnership, which is the practical expression of that, of working together. When we do this work in a sustained and cooperative way, sharing not just our money, but ourselves with each other, opening ourselves to be changed by the work, so much more than money begins to move. When our nation targets Hispanic immigrants, scapegoats them politically, isolates them economically, takes advantage of them for their labor, cheap labor, we are creating a system that alienates and exploits, targets the very people on which our entire economy depends. Whatever our laws are, our nation invites every day migrant laborers from the South to come and work in our fields, on our houses, and our service industries. Because however low our wages are, they are 1,000,000 times higher than what people can earn in their own homes. And our economy depends on them coming and providing this labor. Without them, our economy would collapse. It would collapse. And so, despite whatever our laws say, the economic machine of our country, the economic dependence of all our lives on its sustainability, invite these people to come and live here and work here for our benefit. For our benefit. One more way that we exploit labor. And then our politics, certainly one side of our politics more than another, but both sides to some degree, target and exploit, in many cases scapegoat these people for economic gain as well. We invite with one hand and beat down with the other this group of people on whom all of our lives depend. How foolish. Why would we do that? Why would we treat people on whom our lives depend in this double-handed, doubly negative way? And so when a person like Agner steps forward to leverage resources that come from our shared tax base, our federal and state and county resources, and pushes week after week after week for months to support just one family, and as soon as he achieves success, digs back in to help four more, and by his leadership pulls the rest of us in, and develops resources now in the hundreds of thousands of dollars that we've raised over the last 18 plus months to support these families, and builds not just an avenue to provide for rent and mortgage and utilities, but builds relationship with these families and trust with these families and helps them secure other resources and connects them with networks of support to sustain their lives. Do you see? He is supporting all of our lives, our entire economy. He is pushing back the stone of political exploitation and scapegoating and transforming the way economy works from an economy of scarcity and exploitation to one of abundance, of energy flowing to support everyone involved, not just that family, although they are absolutely the priority and they should be, but every one of us who benefits from their being there, and there is not one of us who does not. And that is what sharing does. That's what sharing does. If we could ever systematize it in a way that allows for freedom and creativity and healthy competition, but also so that everyone is cared for, that would be genius. That would be political genius. And I'm 100% in favor of it. But that would be a massive transformation of our culture of greed that is 500 years deep, at the very least. But I am not without hope because of people like Agner and people like your congregation who have shared resources for this same effort, and people like in my congregation who have done the same, and the way in which all of us, each of us individually and all of us in partnership, can choose every day not to exploit, however best we're able to see it, sunk as we are in a culture of greed and exploitation. Every day we can choose to do our best to see clearly and to share what we have as much as we can to sustain each other. It changes our lives not just for a moment, but radically every one of our lives in an interconnected web of mutuality, inescapable. And thank heavens that it is. Because when we share, we change the world for everyone. And we do it a little better every day, until the world is finally a place that is livable for us all. May it be so.
And now, a musical reflection with Mike Alec.
Greetings, everyone. It's a beautiful earth-filled day. Under the earth and stone, where will we be tomorrow? After the great bird's flown, spreading their wings in sorrow, but still there's one light shining, the one that's only mine, under the earth and stone. So many years ago, why don't we leave it alone? And now that we know what we know, and still that one light shines, the one that's always mine, more than you'll ever know, more than you'll know. Don't look back, it's a one-way journey. Roads are covered with signs. Fill your bags, hey, we'll load our saddles. Early morning, we'll take that ride over the earth and stone. So many miles to go, raising a flag of our own. And now that we know what we know, I feel that one light shine, the one that's yours and mine, more than you'll ever know, more than you'll know. Take care.
Our closing reading comes from Susan Leslie's concluding essay in the collection of essays called Soul Work, papers and presentations drawn from a UU convocation to think through and address anti-racism, internal and external work in the UUA almost 2 decades ago. Leslie writes about the power of partnerships, of working together, organizations and congregations joining together in community work, in anti-racism work, in the work of justice, and the spiritual effect that that has on us, the transformative effect that it has on us to share not only resources, but purpose and power. She writes, anti-racism presents an opportunity for spiritual transformation, powerful enough to eliminate the devastating violence and oppressions of systems of domination based on race, ethnicity, and culture. Anti-racist partnerships offer a home base for this work, a spiritual and political foundation that provides opportunities for collaboration and accountability. Thus, creating partnerships can be a formative, spiritual task. In addition to exerting greater influence on political issues and creating more equitable conditions in our communities, partnerships help to create new relationships. They require parties to share, and redistribute power within the alliance while simultaneously working for change on a broader scale. Share.
Thank you, Reverend Neely, for your instruction and wisdom and for being with us this morning. And now for a few announcements. If you're a visitor, welcome. We're so pleased you chose to give our virtual service a try. If you like what you've heard and are wondering how to stay connected or get involved with our congregation, please reach out to our membership chair, Linda. Her email address can be found at the bottom of the screen. Yesterday, we had our Blessing of the Animals at Tractor Supply in Denver, North Carolina. Good job, Pat and Animal Ministries. Green Faith will be protesting climate change and government policies at the Government Plaza in Charlotte at noon on October 18th. Reverend Pat plans to attend and would love to have somebody keep him company. He says he has extra seats and will even vacuum out the dog hair. Also, if you have pastoral concerns, please reach out to Reverend Pat. The board voted this week to resume in-person gathering in the month of December, provided we can meet certain metrics. Of course, we're watching the numbers, hoping that they'll continue to improve. We expect the positivity rate to be at 5% or less, that we will have services for vaccinated people, and we will require masks, and we will watch the CDC for guidelines. And we'll keep you updated on that, but just hope that we can get back together for the holidays. Wouldn't that just be wonderful? The board also would like to recognize the wonderful work Linda Heidenberg has done as a membership chair. Her term will expire at the end of this year, and she'll be replaced by Marge Flowers. We'll be conducting elections for our 2022 board on Wednesday, November 10th by email, and we'll be in touch to talk about that process and how it's going to work. But the positions available are vice president, treasurer, secretary, and trustee. If you would like to volunteer for a position or nominate someone, contact either Agnes Fiore, Linda Heidenberg, or Kim Worthington. The volunteers continue to work each month at Feed and See. That's become one of our hallmarks of our social justice program. It's just a really good opportunity to do some good and interact with some very good people and to learn a little bit of what goes on in our community that often we aren't even aware of. The next work day will be November 11th, and if you can work or would like to volunteer or get on the list, contact Sandy McFeely. Movie Tuesdays are back. This is just a real fun time for us, and we hope if you haven't participated in this, you might try it sometime. We go to the movie, and then we go out and have a glass of wine or meal and chat, depending on the time, and chat about the movie. Okay. For members, we're obviously not passing around a basket. We're meeting virtually. But we do encourage members to keep their pledges current and for donations to continue to come in, because we are going to be meeting live again, and we do have expenses even when we meet virtually. We also encourage you to continue reaching out to one another and making sure that people are safe and well during the time of the, since we are still in the time of the pandemic. It's been a good service, folks, and now I'm going to extinguish our chalice, but not the flame of love that lives in our hearts. Go now in peace. Namaste, shalom, and blessed be.